The scariest I've ever been, it didn't involve me, it involved my grandson. We were going to bed. He wanted to hang out, with his little friends. And we told him to be in the room at 12. For some reason, I woke up. It was like 2:30 in the morning. And then I realized, he's not here. And I was petrified.
Love listening to Tech Tales? Be sure to smash that subscribe button so you never miss a seaworthy story, fascinating insight, or incredible behind-the-scenes moment. Climb aboard, stay shipshape, and catch every episode fresh off the boat the second it drops. Ahoy ahoy to all you smooth sailors out there, and welcome aboard the Tech Tales podcast. I'm your host and captain, Sammy Catlin, and this is where we dive headfirst into life at sea. From stunning destinations to unexpected storms, our guests have stories that will make you laugh, gasp, and maybe even shed a tear. Whether you're a seasoned sea dog or simply curious about life on board, Tech Tales is your boarding pass to a world of nautical narratives. My guest today is Mr. Paul Thornton, a man who's gone from working in a military psychiatric unit to moving millions in corporate finance, to riding the wave of the video rental boom, then pivoting into academia to earn his doctorate. Now, he's one of cruising's most passionate podcasters. He's the author of the Joy of Cruising book series and the host of the Joy of Cruising podcast. With over 40 cruises under his belt and stories for days, let's anchor up and dive right in. Hello, Paul. That's it. We've got all the technical stuff out of the way. How are you doing, mate?
I am doing great. I just finished recording this week's podcast. Yours is killing it, by the way.
Oh, yeah? Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And so I used to do a thing, Sam, where on each birthday, the first two birthdays of my podcast, I did a special episode where I took some of the funniest pieces or the saddest pieces, the most poignant pieces, whatever, out of episodes that I had recorded that year. And then on the podcast birthday, which happens to be the first week of February, I do like a special show. So, in the end of my podcast, when I ask people for funny stories or I ask people to say something no one knows about them.
Yes.
So the first 2 years, I just had some great stuff. By the third year, I skipped that. This February, I skipped that. But now I'm definitely going to bring it back because your story, when I asked you to give a story or say something no one knows about you, your story about the painter at the brothel. Oh, my goodness. There's no way I cannot bring that back.
You're going to use it just for that.
Yeah, I'm going to. Well, I know that will be on it. There'll be other funny stuff, but that one is priceless.
Well, we should do the cross promotion now by saying that if you have no idea what Paul is talking about, people, he is the host of the Joy of Cruising podcast. And a couple of weeks ago, I was a guest on his show and he interviewed me. And so that episode's been out now for a couple of weeks. But by the time this episode comes out, that'll be a few months down the line because I work a bit slower than Paul. But today, the shoe is on the other foot, my friend. I get to grill you about stuff and you got to just better be ready.
Well, I hope I am ready because, your show is geared somewhat towards people who have worked on a ship. And I never have, but I have been very close to cruising for almost as long as you've been alive, Sam.
Goodness.
I think longer than you've been alive. I'm not going to ask you to state your age, but just look.
I'm 38.
Okay.
38 years young, born 87.
Well, then I was cruising when you were just a tiny, tiny piece of biology swimming around.
When you say you were cruising, I'm guessing recreationally and not as a crew member.
No, never been a crew member. Although when I first started cruising recreationally, for some crazy reason, I always thought it was kind of I thought it would be a romantic life working on a cruise ship. Of course, at that time, I didn't notice that there were hardly any Americans working on ships. And I know why now. But back then, when I was much younger, I thought that would be so neat.
Were you hypnotized by the ideals in the show, The Love Boat?
No, No, not really. I watched the Love Boat, but I wasn't a huge Love Boat fan. First of all, it's easy to be hypnotized just by the notion of water, looking out at the ocean. That's my thing. I think it has something to do with this, Sam. So I did my college years in a non-traditional way. So I was in the military. So I didn't go to like a campus and have wild parties and drinking and all of the things, not everyone, but the things that most college kids do. By the time I went to college, I was a young adult. Actually, I was college age, but I had been out of home and had been in the military for a couple of years, so I was on my own, and so I never got that experience. And I suspect that I surmised that if I worked on a cruise ship below deck, that's where it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been there, so you probably know I'm right somewhat.
Yeah, to some extent, you're absolutely spot on, my friend.
So in 2018, I did a family cruise. So I brought my wife. I have two grown daughters, and one of the daughters is married and has two kids. And so I took them all on a cruise, and it was just absolutely wonderful. I mean, when I think about it, Sam, tears come to my eyes. That's how wonderful it was. Because I had never done, I took my daughters on cruises growing up, but I didn't spend any time with them. But this cruise was just so wonderful.
You didn't spend any time with them on the cruise or in general?
On the cruise, when I took them with me, they wanted to hang out with young people, and I didn't want to be bothered with them, so it worked out for all of us.
Yeah.
But on this family cruise, we were all we did a lot of stuff together. So after I got back, it was just so wonderful, and I got struck by the bug. I mean, I had been cruising a long time before that, but that really amped things up, and I decided to write a book called The Joy of Cruising. So that trip was only one chapter of the book. It was the last chapter of the book. But the rest of the book were sort of like profiles of various people connected with cruising that I just thought readers would find interesting. Well, the book did very well. Enough so that I decided to write another one, and I was going to call it More Joy of Cruising. And so I'd say I was about half done with the writing, but I had done virtually all my interviews. And then we had the frickin' pandemic, okay? So here I was with this half-complete book. And at the time, I felt like my life came to an end. I mean, that was what I was doing 100% of my time, And I just retired, so that's all I was doing, was writing. And then the pandemic came, and I put my stuff away for about 6 months.
This time.
I looked up and I see Sam with a COVID mask on.
Yep. It's a filter. I'll take it off.
So I put my writing away for 6 months. I eventually got back to it and decided to finish the book. So I did. But when I finished the book, the pandemic was still on, and people were dying by the thousands worldwide, So I figured I couldn't release the book and have joy in the title. It just didn't feel right. So I changed the title from More Joy of Cruising to Cruising Interrupted. And so I clearly now was firmly on the content creation side of things. And then I had one more book in me. The cruising came back. And so the third book was kind of celebratory, kind of like, hey, we're back. Because I'll be honest with you, Sam, I was worried cruising wasn't going to survive. I really, really was preparing myself for cruising to be over for good. Maybe that was an overreaction, but when you're addicted to something like I was, and it gets taken away, you go through serious changes, or you go cold turkey or whatever.
Withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah. So when cruising came back, I said, I thought I was done with the books. I said, but I got to write another book. And it was kind of a celebration. It was called The Joy of Cruising Again. So I love the process of interviewing various guests. And I can, if you want, I can tell you the kind of people who were in the book. But somewhere between the second and the third book, I said, writing books costs money and costs time. Mm-hmm. And what I'm doing fits perfectly in the framework of a podcast. And so that's when I created the Joy of Cruising podcast, which really is nothing but every episode is like one chapter of a book,
Yeah.
So I don't think I'll ever write about cruising again, but I don't see ever stopping this podcast unless, they kind of take it from me and I'm sort of, not able to recognize my family and stuff like that, so.
Who would take it away from you?
Well, people would say, well, no more podcasting about cruising, Paul, because you have dementia or something like that.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That's what I mean by take it away from. Take my iPad and my computer. If you take my iPad and computer, that's it. That's like I go to sleep with my iPad and computer.
But so you've not worked on a ship for any particular reason? You were in the army. You didn't say much about that. Were you ever drawn to it after a career in the forces? And what was there some incident that deterred you from going down that path?
No. It was all cruising as pleasure. Like I said, I fantasize about working on ships, but I got married very young, or to my first wife very young. So if I were single, I probably would have pursued working on ships.
That's fair enough. What was it you were doing in the army, Paul?
You would find it hard to believe, but maybe not hard to believe, because I was an enlisted man, so I wasn't an officer. I was what you call an enlisted swine, and I worked in a psychiatric clinic. So what I did was take case studies of people who come in the clinic and they want to see like a doc. I would say, Sam, 90% of the guys, they were trying to get out. So they were faking, they were bullshitters. And so what I had to do was kind of separate the bullshitters from people who were really in need of help. Yeah. And that was kind of easy to do, especially as I got good at my job, which I did. I ended up getting really, really good at my job.
You could smell BS a mile off.
Yeah. I could almost tell when they walked in.
Oh, wow.
That they weren't mentally ill. Now, and they weren't all soldiers. So they were also soldiers' dependents. So they were wives and children and stuff like that. So, yeah, I saw some really, so usually when the wives came in or the children came in, it was genuine. They weren't really trying to get out of the military because they weren't in the military. They were just really trying to get help. But most of the guys were trying to get over.
There weren't any guys who were just trying to get away from their wives? That's why they joined the military?
Yeah, but if they got out, then they'd have to go back to their wife. So they didn't want. If they joined the military to get away from their wife, they didn't want to get put out of the military.
Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't be in your office trying to.
That's right. That's right. So I worked in a psychiatric clinic. All of my peers, not my peers, but the people I worked with were like psychiatrists, psychologists, nurse clinicians. There were a few other enlisted swine like myself. But mostly I work with professionals. And that's a good thing because that's how I got put on the right track in terms of education. The people I work with had a high value for education. And I joined the Army right out of high school. So I didn't even graduate from my class. My class graduated in June and I joined in February. But they recognized that I had something going for me, upstairs. And so they kind of pushed me towards education. So I started off studying like mental health because I liked it, but the more I studied it and researched it, I learned that you don't make any money unless you become, like a psychiatrist or psychologist or psychiatrist. And at this point, I was in my early 20s. I was married. It's a little late in life to decide you want to go to medical school. Some people do it, but I was in no position, at least financially.
That ship had sailed, you thought?
Yeah. So but I did go to college because of my job, because of my coworkers. But I eventually switched from mental health to business. So that's my background is business, and I worked in corporate for many years.
What kind of work did you do in corporate?
Really boring stuff, finance stuff,
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So moving millions of dollars, because I worked for, at the time, it was the 9th largest company in the world. So, I had one job where every morning I had to move literally millions and millions of dollars. And that sounds real impressive, especially if you ever heard my father tell people what I did. I mean, he made it sound like I worked, by the way, for a company some of your listeners might have heard of. They were huge at the time. They were called DuPont. And, DuPont.
Oh, DuPont. Sorry,
Yeah,
DuPont. Yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, and my father would tell, people, my son, he's responsible for, determining what happens with millions of dollars every day. Well, that's kind of exaggeration. Usually some other higher level people would decide how much needed to be moved. And my group handled the mechanics. So my dad was a little exaggerating what my importance to the company. But anyway.
He was proud of you, Paul.
Yeah. That was his thing.
He was showing you off to his friends and family.
Yeah, my dad's the kind of guy, he never showed pride in you to your face, but he brags about you crazily to other people.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
But so after the finance, it's funny you say about it being boring work, because I do a lot of work for people in finance and all other, many different sectors. And whenever we're chewing the fat and I say, hey, so what do you do? And they say, oh, I work in finance, and there's that sound of like regret in their voice, It's
yeah.
It's just boring. Yeah, it pays good, but I'm dead inside.
Yeah, that described me perfectly.
So how long did you do that for?
17 years I worked for DuPont. And then I went out on my own because there was a new business was coming upon us, and so I jumped on that train. Now you're a little young for this, but your parents probably remember it. Video stores. I'm sure you had those in UK.
Blockbuster, of course.
So I bought a video store in 1985, and that's when video was literally just being born. So I took a chance because I had a feeling that it was the next big thing, and I was right. So I got in just right. So from 95 to, not 95, 85, from 85 to 90, I was rolling in dough, and I was still working for DuPont, by the way. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So initially I bought it and then I ran it, but I had people working there. And so initially I was making as much money through video as I was making from DuPont. And I was a corporate executive at DuPont, But, when you love something, you stay in it too long. And that's what I did. I got comfortable. And I should have got out after I made a ton of money. Not a ton of money. I never made a ton of money, but I made good money. And I should have moved on. But I loved that business. It's the kind of love I had for that business. It's the kind of love I have for cruising now. So when you're passionate about something, you hold on to it.
And obviously, having made a bit of money, it was able to give you the financial stability and readies to go and have cruise ship holidays.
Yeah, or it gave me the money it suggested that I had enough security to walk away from one of the world's largest companies. That kind of I was wrong because, things happen in cycles, and so I rode the wave up a of video stores, but then, then I rode the wave down.
You held on too tight? You didn't let it go in time?
Yeah, someone called Blockbuster came along, and they started making it really, really hard for little guys like me. And then Netflix came along, and they crushed Blockbuster. So that business is no more. And again, half your audience probably has no idea what I'm talking about.
I don't know about that. I think there's a fair few people that would know exactly what you're talking about. Going through the trajectory from going from being in the military, working in the psychiatric ward, kind of assessing people if they're trying to get out of active duty or if they're, actually genuine, and then going on to working in finance. That was the main bulk of your working career, working for DuPont, or was there another job after that?
There was actually a whole nother career. Wow. when I was running the video stores full time, when I was totally done with DuPont, you walk away from a six-figure salary, you got to supplement your income, especially because video was beginning its downtrend. And so I started teaching on the side. I had a master's degree in business administration. So I started teaching some classes for a local college just to make some extra change. And then one day the chair at that college, the chair of the business department, asked me, would I be interested in interviewing for a full-time job? And I said, sounds interesting, but I don't have a doctorate. Every professor had a doctorate. And she said, but I'm the chair, So in so many words, she said,
doesn't matter.
Yeah, if you're the best, we'll hire you. And so I got the job. And then once I got the job, I went to get a doctorate on the part-time, because I didn't like to be around all of these men and women who were Dr. this and Dr. that, and I was just Mr. this and Mr. that. So I went and I got my doctorate. So I ended up with a new career. Even when I got hired as a full-time professor, you teach like full-time professors only teach like about four or five classes a week. So I had a lot of time to run the video business. But then after a while, I moved into administration in education, and I became like a dean or an assistant dean or whatever. And so I had an education career, a full-time education career for another 15 years. So that was my career after business.
Goodness. I think you might be the first doctor I've essentially had on Deck Tales. But I didn't even realize, because through all of our email exchange and even during the whole of our last recording, when I came on your show, obviously we didn't touch on any of this and I had no idea. Mm-hmm. So it's fascinating. You're the guy who wrote these 3 books, hosts this podcast, and you're a humble doctor behind it all, Paul.
Yeah, and I just started, well, I shouldn't say I just started. Less than a year ago, though, I started a new podcast. That's why I have this hat on. It's called Lucid Driver, or Lucid Driver Podcast. Mm-hmm. And once again, half your audience probably has no idea what I'm talking about, because Lucid is a vehicle, and it's a pretty new vehicle. It's only been out a few years. And so the podcast is really kind of a niche, but there's no other Lucid podcast in the world. So
what is a Lucid vehicle? What is it?
It's an electric vehicle, and it's kind of a luxury car. So a lot of people, you've heard of Tesla, of course.
I have, of course, I've heard of Lucid. I've just looked at a picture of it, and I'm like, yes, of course. And
yeah. So a lot of people who owned Teslas, which I used to, have moved to Lucid. So yeah, it's a podcast about a car. But they have more than a car. They have a car. They have an SUV, stuff like that. And so it's growing. We just hit. It hasn't been a year yet, and we just hit 60 countries.
Very good.
So I mean, there might be one listener in that country, but we got a listener in not a list. I don't know how many, but we got listeners in Russia, Uganda, Ukraine.
Don't have to list them all, Paul.
I don't think there's only one listener in each of those countries, probably.
Well, most of the audience for Deck Tales, it might not come as any surprise to you, Paul, but it's mostly Americans. For all the episodes so far, a good 76% of my listenership is in the United States. 10% is in the UK. But that's not including people that are watching it now on YouTube.
Our numbers are exactly the same because
Yeah.
my top four, my America is about the same percentage as yours, and then the next is UK, and then Canada and Australia.
Shout out to all you Americans out there listening. I do like to acknowledge people individually when I can, but it's kind of feels a bit not disingenuous when you just shout out a whole country.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a one to one kind of guy usually.
Even though listeners may be 10% from UK, I have a lot of guests from UK.
Yeah, you do.
You know, UK has a very, very vibrant cruising community. It seems more so than the US, but you know, that's not the case in terms of how many listeners I get. But yeah, it's just a lot of people from UK who are willing to be on the show. Maybe in America they're just not as willing. I don't know.
Your guests are specifically either guests on board ships or their crew that have worked on ships. That's correct, right?
All kind of connections, any connection to a ship. So I've had captains, a couple of captains. I've had the chairman of the board of Royal Caribbean. So
Wow.
so it could be very low level crew, like you know. I don't like the term low level, but I'm not sure what else you call them. A food service worker, you know, all the way up to anybody who has a story that I think people want to hear. So a guy I had on recently, he stars in what's the show? It's held on a yacht. I think it comes out of UK.
Are you thinking of Below Deck?
Below Deck, yeah. So he stars on Below Deck.
All right.
So he's been on the podcast. Now, he's on the podcast really kind of two angles. One is he's a star on Below Deck. So, you know, I had a whole lot of pictures of him. I'm sure a whole lot of people tuned in just from his pictures, you know, because the guy looks like Adonis, you know. So I had him on as a TV show star, but he also has a very interesting business that he teaches regular people like you and me how to work on yachts.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because there's a whole subculture. I've learned this because I also had one of these people. There's a whole subculture of people who I guess they get paid something, but they don't get paid much. And they work on yachts.
They take a cut on a salary just to get their foot in the door.
Yeah, and they cruise the world, and you know, a yacht is like, I mean, luxury. So I've had a person on the show who's one of these people who she financed her trips around the world as a younger person by working on yachts. But his particular thing was he ran an online school of how you work on a yacht. But the other aspect of him was he was on a TV show. So anybody I've had there has to be, you know, some connection with cruising, number one, but it also has to be someone that I think my listeners would want to hear from. And sometimes I have what I call, and I'm using air quotes for those who can't see me, ordinary cruisers with extraordinary stories. So it might be someone no one's ever heard of. That's what I mean by ordinary cruisers. Nobody's ordinary, but that's what I mean by that. So it might be someone no one ever heard of, but they had a story to tell that was so amazing. And I've had people like this. I've had a woman. She was on a ship when COVID hit. She was on a ship where people died, and she caught COVID. She had one lung when she caught COVID because she had lung cancer. It was just an unbelievable story. I think it was called Drama on the High Seas, and it really was like you could watch a short show on, say, Netflix. It was that dramatic, but it was an audio podcast. You know, they couldn't get home because in Florida, the president at the time didn't want to accept them because his numbers would go way up. Yeah. His COVID numbers would go. So I've had all kind of shows, and sometimes they're funny, but sometimes they're very, very poignant and sad and dramatic, you know?
Yeah. But so of all of the people, because you said that you've got you tried to select people based on what you think your audience would like to hear, but you don't know your audience, essentially the same as me. The audience is kind of faceless, and whoever tunes in from wherever is tuning in. So you don't know necessarily what they might want to hear. Is it more like what you've got in your mind as to what you think they would like to hear?
Yes.
And are there certain people that you think, they probably haven't got any stories, I'm not too bothered about hearing from them in particular?
Right. Yes.
So
the
what
answer is
people...
yes. I don't know when I say listeners that my listeners would want to hear. I don't know that. I'm surmising that my listeners would want to hear it.
There isn't, like, say, for example, all the jobs on like a bingo card, right? And you're checking them off, because you got that one's in the can, you've recorded with that person or the person that works in that department. And there's not like a few that are in departments that are, say, for example, positions that you don't necessarily want to check off that bingo card. It's just that they haven't happened yet.
Yeah. I would want to, almost anyone who has worked on a ship has stories.
Of course. Yeah.
And so if you've worked on a ship, it's almost automatic that I want to interview you, you know? And there's some people, I can't think of anyone at the moment, but there's some people that have approached me and, it didn't sound like their story would be that compelling. And I pride myself on being a good interviewer because I'll be honest with you, Sam, I have, of the hundreds of people I have interviewed, I have never done what I think is boring. I have never like done a show that I didn't want to put on the podcast.
Well, let's hope that doesn't happen with this episode, Paul.
because to me,
if you're still listening, we appreciate you.
I can't promise you that this will be compelling, but if on my shows, they're always compelling. I haven't had someone. I read a lot of podcast groups and people complain about, well, what do you do when a guest is just not interesting? Well, if I respond, there's two things I say to that person. Well, and I say gently, I say, well, number one, you didn't do your research real well because you got somebody who doesn't have much to say. You ought to be able to pick that out in your research. But number two, I would question, I don't say it like this, but the question that they should have is on them as an interviewer.
To prepare for it.
Yeah, because if you have a guest and you're not able to make that guest compelling, yet you thought the guest had a compelling story in the first place, then you might want to look at your interviewing style.
And also, Paul, for anyone out there who's a podcast host who's listening or thinking about becoming a podcast host, no one ever is an amazing podcast with the first ever episode or even the first 10 or 20. You get better at it over time, right?
No question.
You can listen to your old episodes and be like, damn, I wasn't very good when I first started, but look at me now. I'm 250 episodes plus and I'm crushing it. Like everything, you get better over time.
But I front loaded my first few podcasts. So remember, before I ever started the podcast, I had written 3 books. So my very first guests, my first 2 guests were both people I had featured in my book.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, so they had huge followings. And so there was already a pent-up demand. All I would have to do was count on people who love, my first guest, Cruise Tips TV.
Cruise
Tips TV. And she has a huge following. One of the most beloved people in all of cruising. And she's wonderful. Sherry has been in 2 of my books and has been on the podcast 3 times. So, her shows were sort of like a built-in hit.
Yeah.
I didn't have to prove myself. I mean, I hope I did okay. She was on my first show, and on my first show, I learned you don't have your cell phone in the room because my cell phone rang.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize it until I was listening to the podcast one day. But it had already been out in the public. So I use that story when someone asks on Facebook, what's the biggest mistake you made as a podcaster when you first started out or something like that? And I would tell that story about the phone ringing, but because Sherry was such a great guest, no one noticed.
But guests and people of podcast nature aside, Paul, we should really talk a bit about your own deck tales, because that's the nature of the show. So after you'd finished, or when you were doing your doctorate and you were studying to become a doctor, you were, I'm assuming, taking time off here and there to go on your first set of cruises. What was your first cruise that you went
No,
on?
I had been on cruises long before that. My first
Sorry,
cruise
yes.
was 38 years ago. Remember
Yes.
when you were not yet an infant?
Yeah. So your first cruise, let's talk about that. Because you said that, the thing that was the catalyst for you doing this whole book that you wrote was the family cruise.
Right, right.
But that first cruise you took back in 88, 87, was it?
88.
88. What was that like? What do you remember the most about it?
I remember it well because the ship was brand new and it was kind of revolutionary. It was, today we have all of these mega ships, and this was really the first mega ship. It was Royal Caribbean. It was Sovereign of the Seas.
Yep, that's still going.
Well, it's at the bottom of the ocean now.
Oh, apologies. I thought it was still going.
Yeah.
So that one sank.
Yeah. Well, it's been scrapped. Yeah. But
it's not the bottom of the sea. It's scrapped. That's different.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I mean. And so we were big at that time. We were big in what's called all-inclusive land vacations. Mainly to Jamaica. You go there and it's all you can eat and all you can drink. It was very similar to the cruise model. The only difference was you never moved. You would go on excursions during the day by bus, but you stayed at that resort for a week. And so the cruise model was sort of bringing the resorts to you every week or every couple of days, you know? So I decided to try a cruise because I love the notion of, all you can eat, all you can drink. They even had all you can smoke, cigarettes. And to show you how stupid I was at the time, Sam, I had quit smoking. And so I had been off cigarettes for like 3 years. And then we went on this cruise, and at all the bars, they'd have dishes of cigarettes. And I just had this mindset, they're going to lose money on me. I'm going to drink. I'm just going to take advantage of everything that was included. And so I just started lighting up at the bar. And I just assumed, when the vacation was over, I wouldn't light up anymore. Well, I was wrong. And so I ended up,
going into rehab,
regaining the habit.
I was going to say, going to rehab or, something a bit less intense. Like it's one of those things. Working on ships was one of the things that got me started on smoking because down in the crew bar, it was like the only place where the crew would be able to go and smoke and sit down. There was, of course, outdoor areas, but the crew bar was so centrally located. It was kind of the easiest place to get to be able to go and smoke.
Right.
So it was the place where everyone would go. So it just it got its claws in at an early age. And it's been a habit that I've been trying to kick for a long time. I've reduced my intake by some margin. I used to be on, the most I ever was on was like 40 a day.
Oh, wow.
I was on I was going through 2 packs of Marlboros a day. I was sharing a cabin with this 40-odd-year-old Indian sommelier called Norman. He was an alcoholic and he smoked.
Oh, wow.
You know what? Did you ever hear a thing called slop chest?
No.
So that's like down below deck where cigarettes and alcohol is sold to the crew at a discounted rate.
Okay.
They have different names for it. But for me and the several ships I worked, it was known as slop chest.
Okay.
And you could buy 200 Marlboros for $12.
Yeah. In fact, the guy who I had on, that videographer I said I had on, he didn't use that term, but he talked about that because he was trying to explain why so many of the crew developed drinking problems because they were kind of like they were almost giving it away.
That's it.
But so anyway, I was just going to say, when that new ship came out and I read about it, I decided to try cruising because it sounded so similar to what we were already doing on these all-inclusives. I was a little nervous because, it was more expensive than anything I had ever done. And I was worried that we would spend all this money to get on for a week. And then what happens if you're seasick? And fortunately, that has never been a problem for me. And so we became cruisers.
Cruise enthusiasts. And the rest is history.
Yep.
Did you have, so how many cruises would you say you've done in your lifetime now? Give or take.
Somewhere around 45, 50.
Have you got any standout, scariest moments on your time on board?
Scariest moments?
Yeah.
The scariest I've ever been, it didn't involve me. It involved my grandson. And I can't remember how old he was. He must have been between 10 and 12. And so we were going to bed, and he wanted to hang out, with his little friends. And we told him to be in the room at 12. And he was a tiny little guy. I mean, I was kind of worried about the wind blowing him overboard. He was that skinny, that tiny. So I woke up, for some reason I woke up. It was like 2:30 in the morning. And then I realized, oh shit, he's not here, And I was petrified because, I jokingly at first worried about him blowing overboard, but now I was like worried about him blowing overboard. He was not the kind of guy who would just ignore me telling him to be here at 12, at midnight. So I got up to search for him. So that was the most scared that I have ever been. It was a happy ending, but it was a very interesting situation because I was going up and down stairwells looking for him. And Sam, I went up one stairwell and there was a little kid. I'm not lying to you. He couldn't have been much more than 3 years old. And he kept saying, "Daddy, Daddy." And I'm like, this guy has lost his parents, And it's like 2:30 in the morning, and he's in the stairwell. So I grabbed his hand, and so I took him up, out of the stairwell up to like the elevator bank. And I saw like a worker or something. I said, "Can you call security?" So someone came, and he didn't look like security. He just, I expected security to be like sort of big, burly guys with maybe not with a gun, but with handcuffs and, looking a little more like a cop.
And
this guy, this guy just looked like he worked for the ship, but he didn't look like a security guy. And so he said, "Okay, I'll take him to." I said, "Oh no!" I said, "He's going to stay with me until you bring security up here." I wasn't just going to let him go with some guy. So I stood and they called security. And then now the guys who I expected to come came, and then I turned over the little kid or turned loose the little kid. and so I told them what I was doing. I was looking for my grandson. Have they seen? And I described them. And they told me there's a bunch of guys at the basketball court. And sure enough, I went out to that, and that's where he was. But the next day, I saw the little kid and his dad. They were playing ping pong. And, the little kid recognized me. And I said to the dad, "Hey," I introduced myself. I said, "Hey, I found your son last night." And so we chatted for a few minutes. He told me, I don't know how true this is, he told me his son opened the door, let himself out. While they were asleep. My guess is they were out partying and the son was locked in and he found a way to open the door. But I don't know that.
If he's 3 years old, it's not like you can really fact check who's the more honest, truthful person to take notice of.
Yeah. So anyway, but I've never been personally scared about anything on a cruise ship other than, having my grandson in my. Yeah. I was supposed to be watching my grandson and I didn't know where he was.
What about your favorite memories?
Oh, there's many. Of course, the 2018 cruise with my family. That started the whole book writing thing. And then last year on the podcast, I did an episode called My 10 Favorite Cruises of All Time. And so they were all great cruises. But there were a lot of cruises that were great that didn't make the top 10. That 2018 family cruise that started all of this joy of cruising stuff, it couldn't make the top 10. I mean, so it was wonderful. But yeah, I mean, the best cruise I ever did was a river cruise. Yeah, we did a river cruise in southern France. And then we had a 3-day excursion to Paris. So that was just magic. I mean, the kind of cruise that's the most fun for me. 4 of these cruises made the top 10 are what I call theme cruises. Ever been on a theme cruise where it might, like the theme cruise the best one was the Soul Train cruise. You heard of Soul Train, right?
Of course, yeah. So
I'm
this
sure,
is like
sure.
it's like a charter cruise.
Yeah. So I'm sure you grew up, or I grew up with Soul Train when I was a kid. So these are the kind of artists, performers who would have been on the original Soul Train. Now, obviously, a lot of them are older and have passed on, but the band is still active. So they'll probably have like a few originals, but then a lot of younger guys who were maybe not even alive when they played on Soul Train originally. And man, I went on Soul Train 2 years in a row. I went on it February last year and February of this year. I want to go on February of 27, but we're doing a group trip in 27 that's very expensive, and I can't afford to do both. So I'm going to skip 27, but I'll be back on the Soul Train cruise in 28. But yeah, I've been on like the Smooth Jazz cruise. I've been on something called Festival at Sea. So theme cruises are wonderful.
Yeah, because it's your people, right? It's not
Yeah,
just like
everybody on a theme cruise has something in common.
they want to be there for the purpose of that
Yeah.
specific cruise.
Yeah,
and
they're
it's,
passionate about the subject matter.
so it's a lot less likely that you're going to get, and I'm sorry to use the name, a Karen.
Right.
You know what? Right.
Right. I know
there.
what a Karen is. Yeah. You don't see fights. It's mostly baby boomers. It's mostly people in my generation. And they also have the company that does the Soul Train cruise. They also do like a country western cruise. They do a rock and roll cruise. They do a cruise based on New Orleans type music. And so. Yeah. You got all of these people who are in their element, Now, I don't like country.
No.
But you can tell. I've seen videos on the country western cruise, and these people are partying because they're in their element. And so I tell my guests all the time, put a theme cruise, a charter cruise on your bucket list, because it's probably going to be one of the best you ever experienced. If you like Star Trek,
yeah, I was just about to say Star Trek.
Go on a Star Trek cruise. There's nothing. You'd never find me on a Star Trek cruise, but if I were into Star Trek, nothing like it. Nothing like it.
Do you know, like back in the day, I don't know what point that they stopped doing it, but they used to do like a passenger's crew card so they could get on and off the ship again, and your face would be on it. Like it was
I don't remember that.
Someone was saying that like there was people on the Star Trek cruise. I think it was Dan, magician Dan. I had him on a while ago, and he was saying like there were people who had their cards, but the picture was taken when they had their prosthetics already on for their costume. And because it took so long to put it on and then to take it off and put it on, they would stay in costume for the entire duration of the entire cruise, so that when they got off, if they didn't have the costume on, then they wouldn't be allowed back on because they didn't. They didn't look like them.
Right.
But you would go in for something like that. That's not your...
And the thing is, Sam, there is no subject matter that is untouchable. So you can go on, as we said, the Star Trek cruise. You can go on wine cruises. There's food, like high-level food cruises. You can go on nude cruises. Yep. So where everybody on there is undressed. And it's not about sex. It's just about being a naturalist,
Yeah.
Now, you also can go on cruises where it is about sex. It's like swingers cruises. But you name it, and there's a theme cruise for it. There's so many theme cruises, and they make a lot of money because they always charge. There's always a premium versus a regular cruise. Mostly because they got to pay, like celebrities. Like on the Star Trek cruise, they got to pay William Shatner,
Yeah, he makes a lot of money from those things.
Yeah, he's like 90-something years old, but...
What about a type of cruise, charter cruise, that doesn't exist that you think should? Or is probably best that it's not? Like, for example, a Somali pirate-themed cruise.
You know what I would do if I could afford to get into the charter business, which I would love to do that. Various types of music have caught on with charter cruises. Yeah. But I'd like to see like a comedy cruise.
There isn't a comedy cruise, you're right.
Like just round the clock comedy. But see, I'm a stand-up comedy addict. So that would appeal to me. Maybe there's not enough of an appeal. I don't know.
I don't think it's necessarily there's not enough of an appeal of it, but I think after a while you kind of get sick of it. Not to suggest that, like for example, we have a thing here in the UK. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in Scotland. It's been going for a very long time, Paul. Very long time. And you can go and see shows from the beginning of the day to last thing at night. And obviously, last thing at night is the best time to go because it's when you've had a couple of drinks, you're feeling a bit loose, and it's the end of the day, you're winding down. You're there to relax. You don't want to go and see a comedy show at 10 in the morning when you're having your first coffee. You're not really settled into the day. You're kind of waking up. But when I went to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, I went by myself. I kind of gigged my way through it, earned a few quid here and there. And, I think the most I did, I think I saw 7 or 8 shows in one day, and they were all great. But by the end of the day, the last show I went to see, I was done laughing. I'd had enough. It's like I'd broken a funny bone or something,
Well, they have that issue, if you want to call it an issue, on like the Soul Train cruise. There's like music around the clock. Well, you don't have to see everybody.
Yeah, that's true.
So, they'll have somebody playing, a star, playing on the Lido deck. And then maybe that afternoon they'll have somebody. And then that night they'll have on the main stage, they'll have a headliner, for half the ship. And then at 9, at 7. And then at 9, they'll have a headliner for the other half. So you kind of could pick and choose. And that's what I would do with stand-up comedy. And it still is going to have all your, like on these other charter cruises, they'll have still your port stops, and they'll still have bingo and trivia and all the other, corny little things they do on cruise ships.
So you've done 250 plus episodes of the Joy of Cruising podcast now. Has there been any controversial guests who you've had on and you were worried about, there potentially being some kind of repercussions from the cruise line industry after promoting or pushing that episode out there?
No, probably because it's very hard to get, at least of the guests who work for cruise lines, it's hard to get them. Because some cruise lines specifically prohibit them. Some cruise lines, maybe they don't know. I don't know. But, anyone who works for the cruise line, they're not going to be controversial. Yeah. Now, I have a person who works for Holland America. She's been on twice. And so you could listen to both her episodes. A heavy cruiser would figure out it's Holland America, but a casual cruiser wouldn't even be able to figure out it's Holland America. Now, the funny thing is, Sam, all of my guests, I ask for photos, cruise photos, beach photos, whatever. And so I've had photos from guests who work for a cruise line, and the cruise line's name is on a ship that they've sent me a photo of, but they don't want me to say what cruise line they work for, Yeah. So the bottom line is you don't get very many controversial guests who currently work on cruise lines. More people who tend to be controversial are former employees.
Yeah.
I have had a guest. It wasn't really controversial. I just had one interaction with a listener. So as you know, or I hope you know, I think you know, Virgin Voyages, they have something called a diva. You familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
So I did a Virgin Voyage cruise, and I really liked the diva. I had never been to a drag show or anything like that, but this diva was good. I mean, she could sing. She had a great voice. Of course, she was funny. There were enough good things about her that I almost immediately decided, I want to interview her. But she agreed to do the show. And so in the lead up to the show, I make posts on various groups, usually people who have like a Facebook group, and they allow me to push my podcast on their page. And I did have one post about this upcoming diva who was going to be on the show. And I did have a guest who pushed back. And I could tell he was a regular listener from some of the things he said, but he pushed back on the notion of diva because I guess if you're very conservative, a drag show is not your vibe.
It's not for everyone.
So yeah. So I don't even remember how I responded to him. I certainly was not going to argue with the prospective listener. I said something, but I don't remember what I said. So anyway, the show happened, and if you ask me what was the biggest surprise I ever had as a podcaster, this would be my answer, because her show was a runaway success in terms of numbers. In terms of numbers that you get and I get. So of all my shows, hers is the 5th most listened to show ever. So obviously, if there was any controversy around her being a drag performer, it didn't affect my numbers. So I'm sure I missed out on that one guy that I had the little interaction with, but I didn't miss out on too many people because her show was a hit.
What about your understanding of how things operate on the underside of crew life? So the hidden economy, the organized crime side of crew life. Has that been a topic of discussion at all with any of your guests?
No. But what I have said, what readers of I have a Joy of Cruising podcast Facebook group, and readers of my group have heard me say more than once, because it's a fact. It'll never happen, but it's a fact. The book I'd like to write, but won't be written, is a true look at the crew. And the reason it will never be written is, number one, to write that kind of book, I would need to get financed by a publisher. I mean, that needs money, and that takes research. And I couldn't use crew members who are on ships now because they'd all lose their job. So I would like to talk to them about family life in Somalia and Jamaica and Serbia and wherever they're from, and talk about what happened during the pandemic, when in many cases they couldn't get home for many, many months. And it was not outside the realm of possibility that you find a crew member dead on those ships, because they were like prisoners for a long, long time. They couldn't get home. So what I'd really like is a story from the crew's perspective, but not one that deals with the happy part of a cruise, not one that deals with the joy of cruising. So this would be a book. This would be not part of my podcast, because I don't think, if I really did an exhaustive book on what's it like to be crew, that I could have joy. You wouldn't have joy in the name of that, in the title of that book.
Sure.
So yeah, that's a book I would love to do, but I couldn't do that with my resources. Someone would have to treat me like an investigative reporter.
It's funny you say that.
A real book.
Because a few years ago, after I finished writing my second book, You Cruise, You Lose, I was reaching out to a bunch of people, and I was trying to get it published. And I can't remember how I got in touch with this person or how they got in touch with me. I think it was somebody I interviewed. They were talking to a journalist who was working for a film director. And this film director was looking to do like a documentary, behind the scenes expose about the cruise industry. And we met for coffee in central London, and I pitched him the book. I told him all the work that had gone into the research that I'd done and everything. And yeah, he was very impressed with it. As we were going through the appendices and the index, all the references, the links to the places I'd sourced, my research, etc. And he said to me, "Sam, how would you feel about going undercover on a cruise?" And I was like, what? How would that even work? Like, as crew, he's like saying, yeah, you'd be a crew member, and you'd like have like a wire, or you'd like have a camera and stuff, and you'd be undercover. I was like, well, It's not something I haven't thought about, but of course, it's not something within the realms of reality. Like, I couldn't fund it and do everything by myself. If you were able to figure it all out and fund the whole thing, I might be interested. But then afterwards, I was kind of like, the reality of it is like, okay, whoever I shared my cabin with would also have to be in on it. And I could be working for 10 months on a long extended cruise contract and not find anything incriminating worthy of a documentary. And so, plus I'm the one who's taking all the risk because I'm the one who signed his name on the dotted line of the contract, and these contracts, as you know, they have defamation clauses in them. So this prohibits crew from coming on podcasts and telling the story exactly how it is, which is why I've had some guests who have opted to not be on camera and they've used a fake name, they've used an avatar. And so that's one way of protecting their identity. They just need to make sure that they don't send me any promotional material, posting the name of the ship in the background or something, or their face and stuff. So got to keep a tight lid on it because it's about being transparent with people, and people want to assume they're going to have a fun time, but they also like to, I think know that their crew are treated fairly and with respect.
Yeah,
but it isn't always the case.
Yeah, and Sam, one issue about going undercover for I don't know how long, 6 months or 9 month or whatever. I mean, you could find yourself at the bottom of the ocean because if you get discovered, all bets are off.
I don't know who would be the one to throw me overboard.
Well, I could imagine people who would want to throw you overboard. You lied. You got inside to people. You got close to people, but you were spying on them. I think that's a very dangerous situation.
Yeah. Yeah, it obviously depends on what narrative you tend to steer the ship down, essentially, as a documentarian, undercover journalist. If you're trying to, say, for example, infiltrate some kind of onboard mafia and you get them all on camera and their faces are in it and they're going to want that immediately gone. Yeah, it's a dangerous proposition. You're right.
You don't know that you're exposing some crime, some a crime network, but you might expose one, and then the people who are in that crime network want to get rid of the evidence. And that's you. I think that would be extremely risky to go undercover. But yeah, I would love to see a television series, a documentary that really goes into detail about crew life. Because I'm sure there's just so much that people don't know, and it would be so illuminating, And yeah, they could the documentary, I'm sure, would cover the fun stuff, raucous crew parties and all of that, but it would cover, I'm sure there's gambling addictions, I'm sure there's alcoholism, there's probably drug addictions, there's probably some sex stuff you can sensationalize. I'm sure that a documentary can be very balanced. It can deal with family and what it's like to have, family back in one of these third world countries. It can deal with, what's church life like on board. It can talk about the whole person, but you'd have to show the dark with the light. And I think the only ones who could do that would be, someone that has just tons of money behind them and not have to worry about pushback from the cruise industry.
Most definitely. Most definitely. So of the 45 cruises that you've done, my friend, you must have been on a lot of excursions in that time. Any of them particular sort of stand out? What's been like the least or the most memorable excursion for the wrong reasons, shall we say?
Yeah, I'm lucky in that I haven't had an excursion from hell. One of my favorite podcasts, though, involved an excursion from hell. This made worldwide news. It was a whole family from Oklahoma. I think it was like 9 people. So it was like a mother-in-law, a married couple, some grandkids. It was like 9 people. and they went on it was in Alaska. A very common excursion in Alaska is like a lumberjack show, where you see a bunch of guys, manly men who throw axes and climb poles and wear plaid flannel shirts, and they just do lumberjack type stuff. Okay.
Right.
So this family went on the excursion, and they went on a Norwegian cruise line excursion. So cruise line excursions have been famous for years and years and years, saying, we won't leave you behind. Right? That's why people go on cruise line excursions, because they promise not to leave you. Well, not to tell you the whole story, take up too much time, but this family of 9 got left behind in Alaska, and they had to make it home with no money. I think they had one credit card. They all had medication of some sort. The mom she looked like she was maybe in her 70s. A lot of them were on medication. So they had no medication, no passports, no money, no clothes, nothing. They were just in Alaska. And it was tough to listen to. But she was the woman, the guest. She was such a trooper. In fact, I plan to get in touch with her to see if she wants to come back on, because my last question to her was, would she ever cruise again? And she would. She was planning a cruise. And then another question I had was, would she ever cruise Norwegian again? And she wasn't ready to say, she didn't say no, but she wasn't ready to say yes. So I'd like to catch up with her and say, hey, what's been going on? But anyway, that was the worst excursion story that I've had as a host.
What was the name of the episode, just so people can find it if they want to hear the full story?
It's The Galt Family's Alaskan Nightmare on NCL, GAULT.
Galt family. Okay.
The Galt family's Alaskan Nightmare on NCL. Episode number 148.
Okay. Thanks for that. That's very, very helpful. Were there any guests you had on with stories who you weren't sure about, but they shocked you the most? Or what were some of your standout favorites that you haven't already mentioned?
Oh, man.
So many, I know. You can't.
I always like interviewing stand-up comedians,
Yeah.
It's hard, though, for a stand-up comedy to translate in a podcast. So the conversations with these comedians, they're not like hilarious. It's not joke telling, but it is good to get to know these guys. I say guys because every comedian I've had has been a male. So, I really like those.
I don't think there are many female cruise comedians. Like it's a bit of a difficult one, because, when you work on a ship, you might be harassed or something along those lines. But if you're a female comedian, there might be a fan after the show who follows you back to your cabin, and it's a little bit more sinister.
Yeah.
There might be something to that, Paul, as to the reasons why you don't see many female comedians away at sea.
Oh, but you do see a lot of female vocalists.
Yeah, vocalists are part of the show team, so they've got like a group.
Well, they're headliners, not a part of the show team. And so I've interviewed quite a few performers, male and actually more female performers, but more male or exclusively male comedians. So,
but you think some of them have the best stories? They're good storytellers, and that's why they, that's why they do what they do.
I will say you're right in that they don't have that many female comedians, so I don't ask that many to, when I think of the last 2 female comedians I experienced, one I didn't ask to be on the show because she wasn't that good, And then on the last cruise I was on, was a headliner, was a female comedian. Her name is Samoa. She's a famous U.S. comedian, and I wouldn't hesitate to have her on my show, but she's a little too big to be on my show.
Oh, don't put yourself down, Paul. Come on, you're number 1.
Yeah, I will probably send. I'm still I still have Soul Train. She was on the Soul Train cruise, and that was only a couple of months ago. I still have that fresh in my mind. So I will probably reach out and say, hey, I was in the audience on the Soul Train cruise when you killed it. Would love to have you. but I'm not counting on her responding back. She's that big.
Well, you never know until you try, my friend.
That's true. That's true.
Some people with massive followings, if you reach out to them, you'd be surprised.
Yeah, yeah.
Like when I messaged Emma Cruises and Gary Bainbridge, I was surprised they got back to me as quickly as they did.
Yeah.
They were very responsive. But it's different.
And I've had them both, but I had the head start in that both of them each of them were in one of my books before the podcast ever became a thing.
With that, so you took stories that you'd read about them and then you put it in your own writing into your books, or how does that crossover happen?
I heard about them for various reasons because I'm just a cruise guy and I go to all of the cruise critic and cruise, mostly Facebook now, but used to go to a lot of places. So I knew of them. So for Emma, for example, when I first heard of Emma, it's funny. I was on a feed on a group, and it was this other guy who owned the feed. And I wanted him to be on the podcast. I never heard of Emma. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, man, really like your content. I like your accent. You're a New Yorker like me, blah, 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 blah. And he was saying, nah, I'm not interested. I'm trying to do my own thing, podcast thing, whatever. He said, talk to Emma. She just won an award. So Emma was one of the members on his site. And so I messaged Emma, to find, well, what award did you win? Well, she had just won, what is very big in UK. You've heard of it, the Wave Award.
Oh, yeah.
And she won the Wave Award at 23 years old. This unheard of, unknown, it was like the best #1 cruise blogger or something like that. They give it out every year. Well, she won it, and no one, up until she won it, not many people had heard of her. And so that gave her a springboard. And so I reached out to her, and she said yes. So, kind of a trivia question, Emma is the very first person who ever agreed to be in one of my books.
Oh, that's a nice little fact.
Yeah. So just people I would see their posts or hear, read about them or hear someone else reference them. Then I do a little research and say, yeah, that's somebody I want to try to talk to.
So you, when you were writing your books, you take all this written content, right, and you get it all put into a book format, and then before you go through with the publishing side of it, you reach out and you basically get everyone's permissions first and foremost.
Yeah. Well, actually, right. I would have gotten their permission before I wrote a word about them, because I didn't want to waste my time.
Ah, that's fair enough. Yeah. Why exactly? Why do that if you're not going to get the permission?
Once I got their permission, then I would schedule a phone call. I could talk cruising nonstop. I could stay up all night and just talk about cruising, and I wouldn't worry about going to sleep. That's right. That's really why I started the podcast. I can't think of anything I would rather talk about than cruising. So,
well, I mean, it's a good thing you have your own podcast for that exact reason. Yeah, because otherwise you would be in some kind of facility somewhere and taking lots of medication to try to come bring you down from this itch that you couldn't scratch.
Yeah. When people retire, especially when people retire, I mean, you have other reasons that you want to do your podcast. You're nowhere close to retirement, but I started my podcast close to retirement, and people who retire and don't pursue a passion, that's dangerous, Sam. I mean, I don't want to be too morbid, but they die. You
got to keep the cogs ticking.
Yeah. My wife works. She gets a lot of little part-time jobs. She doesn't complain that I don't do any work because she probably knows, if I didn't have this, I would probably, start showing signs of being really old. So I don't feel really old, but I'm old in terms of work years. And I have no desire, no plans to go back to work, but I'm busy from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed. And I'm working on podcasts most of the day.
And as you said to me, you're probably busier now than you were when you were actually working.
Yes, I am.
Well, Paul, do me a favour. Don't stay up all night just talking to people about cruise ships. Do make sure you get some rest tonight. And it's lovely to connect with you again. I just want to say thank you so much for being a guest on Deck Tales as a return favour for me to come on your show. It's been a wonderful, back and forth, and I hope we keep this up for many years to come, my friend.
Well, thank you for having me. And I only can hope that this show is as successful for you as your show was for me.
Oh, well, that's very kind.
And your show will continue to pay off because, like I said, I'm going to bring back my, funniest bits of the year. and you are the main reason I'm bringing that back.
Oh, that's too much now. Paul.
I actually can pull a couple from your show, but I just don't know that anything beats the brothel story.
It's a fan favorite. It's one of my nan's favorite stories as well. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Take care, my friend. All the best and to your future endeavours. I hope the next batch of episodes you've got planned are also as successful as the one that you did with me and as you purported how successful that was to be. We'll catch up again soon, my friend, yeah?
Yep. And as I like to say, someday, somehow, we'll see you on the ocean.
We'll see you on the ocean, my friend. Take care. All the best.
All right, you too. Bye-bye now.
Bye, mate. So there you have it. That wraps it up for this episode of Deck Tales. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've been entertained by the tales of laughter, camaraderie and the occasional stormy sea, then don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment. There are lots of other shows out there to compete with, so if you are enjoying Deck Tales, why not help us out by going over to Spotify or Apple and dropping us a 5-star rating. This will boost the show's visibility and help to attract new listeners every week. Before I sign off, if you'd like to share your own stories for future episodes, then I'd love to hear from you. Simply get in touch over the socials because after all, the best stories often come from our listeners. As we navigate through the waters of life, remember to enjoy the journey as much as the destination, as well as those you choose to share the adventure with. I've been your Captain Sammy Catlin. Until next time, fair winds, smooth sailing, and may your adventures be as unforgettable as those shared here on Deck Tales. Bon voyage!